Welcome back to the MMA Training Bible's Guide to Building Unstoppable Endurance in 3 months. I'm Dr. Jason Gillis. Quick overview here. So this course is divided into 2 parts. The first half is Science of Mixed Martial Arts, and the second half, it is all about us working together, me guiding you through a process to create your very own and tailored periodized training plan. In session number 1, we focus on the metabolic demands of mixed martial arts, and we talked about a couple different energy systems. We talked about the ATP PCR system, which is responsible for those explosive movements in the cage. We talked about anaerobic glycolysis, which helps you power those prolonged movements in the cage, but it's also associated with the buildup of metabolites, and that can influence your performance. And finally, we talked about the aerobic energy system in that session. And that aerobic energy system, if you train it well, it will allow you to maintain a high intensity and perform at repeated high intensities over the course of a whole round and over the course of a whole fight. In session number 2, we showed you exactly how to train those energy systems by manipulating the movement pattern and the work to rest ratios and all those different things. Now, the problem with that is if you constantly train those energy systems, if you're constantly training at high intensities, you can increase your likelihood of overtraining. And that's what we want to talk about in this session, how to avoid overtraining, because it can really end a fighter's career before it starts. So I've got some learning objectives for you. First, I want you to appreciate how your body responds to training. Then I want you to be able to explain the general adaptation syndrome and then define overtraining and supercompensation and maladaptation. I also want you to be able to, very importantly, identify the signs and symptoms of overtraining, and finally, understand how you can lower your risk of overtraining. So these are the different sections that we're going to cover in this video lecture. First, we're going to talk about how your body responds to training. Then we're going to talk about signs and symptoms so you can recognize it, and finally, we're going to show you how you can lower your risk for overtraining. But I have a key point to make first. Overtraining, it's a tough opponent. And that's because fighters, they feel this pressure to train so many different factors, and rightly so. There's a lot of different factors that can influence performance on fight day. You've got your strength and conditioning factors, which can include muscular endurance and strength and power. Agility, you've got flexibility, you've got endurance, and that's what we're here to focus on. On top of that, you have all of your MMA skill stuff. You've got your boxing sessions, you've got maybe your Thai sessions, maybe you've got your jiu-jitsu sessions, and then of course you've got your MMA skill sessions. So there's a tremendous pressure to train all of these things all in the course of 1 week. And what can happen is when you have so many training sessions in such a short period of time, and many of them are of a high intensity, that can lead to overtraining. And the trouble is it's very hard to detect overtraining. So as a result of this, many fighters, they'll overtrain, and ultimately it'll lead to their demise. They'll burn out before they reach their full potential. So to avoid overtraining, you need to understand how your body responds to training, and that's what we want to focus on next. But let's first start by saying fatigue is unavoidable. Fatigue is something that you will experience, but primarily you want to experience it in training sessions, and you don't want it to be prolonged over the course of days and weeks and months. The type of fatigue that you'll experience in a training session is going to be due to the type of energy system that you're targeting in that training session. So if you're targeting the aerobic energy system, you're probably going to see fatigue due to inefficient oxygen uptake or delivery or use in your body. If you happen to be targeting the anaerobic glycolytic energy system, then your fatigue is going to be due to a buildup of metabolites in your muscles like hydrogen ions and inorganic phosphate. If you're targeting the ATP PCR system, then fatigue is probably going to be due to a depletion of phosphocreatine, maybe a buildup of some metabolites. You may also see a combination of energy systems being targeted, and if you do it for a prolonged period of time, that's going to lead to a depletion of glycogen. So you may also see a fatigue if you have poor nutrition, if you haven't eaten properly, or if you're not drinking properly, your weight cutting strategy. You may also see fatigue if your brain is telling your muscles not to work anymore, and that can happen if you get really, really hot. You may see a psychological fatigue. Your brain just may say, no, I'm not working anymore. That could be due to your mood, your psychological state. Your pace could also influence fatigue. Maybe you've just chosen to set a pace that just can't be maintained for longer than 15 seconds or 30 seconds. That's a pace issue. Now, depending upon the type of energy system that you targeted, the recovery from fatigue can take different periods of time. So if you're targeting the ATP PCR system, or if you're working at a very high intensity for 15 to 30 seconds and you're depleting phosphocreatine, it can take up to 5 to 8 minutes to totally resupply that phosphocreatine. if you're targeting multiple energy systems, you're working at a very, very high intensity, and you drift into that anaerobic glycolytic zone, then you see a large buildup of lactate in your blood, and that can take up to 25 minutes to remove about half of that. Now, if you're engaging in certain types of sessions, then your strength may be affected, and it may take a couple hours for your strength to be restored, and that's going to be directly related to how much glycogen you consume after your workouts. But in general, most of us are going to recover from a hard workout in a couple of days, and if it's a really, really hard workout, then it could take you maybe closer to a week or so. I want to just take a minute to describe this general adaptation syndrome, which it's really a good tool because it helps us understand how our bodies respond to training. It's a nice little figure we can go through. So what we're looking at here on the vertical scale, it's our level of performance. And on the horizontal scale, we're looking at time. So let's take the example of an exercise session where maybe we're focusing on legs, and let's say we're doing squats. So we do squats, and as a result, our legs will fatigue and our performance on squats will decrease. So at the end of this session, our ability to perform is going to be reduced compared to before the session. But we all know that if we give ourselves enough time to recover, our performance will rebound and it will return to normal. And if we keep on doing this over and over and over again, then ultimately our legs will get stronger and we'll be able to lift more weights, and our 1RM will increase, and eventually our performance in squats will increase. And that's referred to as supercompensation. And it only happens with time and an adequate training stimulus. So the other thing to point out in this figure is that it's nice to have the supercompensation, but if you stop working out and you have a period of time that's too long between training sessions, then your performance will return back to normal and it'll keep on drifting down. So this is the general adaptation syndrome, the notion that you exercise, fatigue happens, your performance drops, and if you allow enough time to recover, your performance will rebound and ultimately supercompensate. It's an important concept. What we're looking at here, it's undesirable. This is your maladaptation of training. You want to avoid this. So let's take a closer look at exactly what we're seeing here. So again, on the vertical axis, we're looking at performance, and on the horizontal axis, we're looking at time. And so this is that same characteristic. We engage in that squat session, let's say, for example, and after that squatting session, our legs, they're going to be weak, and our performance is going to be compared, and our performance is going to be impaired compared to the beginning of that session. But if we give ourselves enough time to recover, then we will recover to a certain extent. But in this example, we haven't given ourselves enough time to recover, so our performance doesn't reach baseline again. We have another workout. But we're still going to see the same characteristic reduction in performance after that exercise session, so our performance is going to fall characteristically. And we give ourselves a little bit of time to recover, but maybe not enough time to recover, so our performance doesn't reach where it was before. And so we have another workout and our performance falls again, and we keep on seeing this pattern over and over again. And the point that we're trying to make here is that if you keep on exercising at high intensities and you don't give yourself enough rest and time to recover, then your performance will slowly degrade, and eventually you'll enter a state of overtraining. And this in total is referred to as your maladaptation of training, and it's to be avoided. Let's start to talk about some signs and symptoms of overtraining. But let's first start by saying that success in mixed martial arts, it really is the end result of a successful, long-term training plan administered not over months, but over years and years and years and years. And over this time, it requires you successfully balancing all aspects of your life, including your relationships and your jobs, with your training and with recovery. It's important to also acknowledge and appreciate that short-term fatigue, it's normal, and it really is essential for your positive adaptation to training. But this fatigue should only last a few days and maybe a little bit more, but not too much longer than a week or so, because that is referred to actually a period as overreaching, and that's good to have. Every once in a while you need to have a period of overreaching because it can help you bust through plateaus. But when you have a long-term period of overreaching, this long-term period of fatigue, that can lead to overtraining. So if you're constantly fatigued for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on end, then you're going to drift into overtraining. And there's two different types of overtraining that I want to introduce you to in case you don't know about them. One is called sympathetic overtraining, and the other one is called parasympathetic overtraining. And importantly, recovery from these types of overtraining, it can take weeks, it can take months, and it can even take years in a worst case. So we've got sympathetic overtraining and parasympathetic overtraining. The reason why we call it sympathetic is because it's associated with a branch of your central nervous system that's responsible for increasing activity in various physiological systems. So we're going to see an increase in resting heart rate. We're going to see a slower heart rate recovery. We're going to see a decrease in appetite, a decrease in body mass, increased sweating. We're going to see also a disturbed sleep pattern. So this is the first step. You can expect after a period of long-standing fatigue and overreaching to start to drift into sympathetic overtraining. And if you stay in this zone for too long, if you continue to train hard, even when you're seeing all of these signs and symptoms, you can expect to move into what's referred to as parasympathetic overtraining. It's called parasympathetic because it refers to the branch of your central nervous system that controls parasympathetic nerves. When you activate parasympathetic nerves, you can it's the antithesis of sympathetic activation. We expect to see a decrease in activation of physiological systems. So we'll expect to see a decrease in resting heart rate. We'll expect to see a decrease in heart rate during light exercise. You'll fatigue sooner. You can't work as hard. Your mood will be altered. You'll feel apathetic. You'll get sick easier. So these are two different types of overtraining that you really need to know. You really need to understand the signs and symptoms and look out for them. How do you reduce the risk for overtraining now that you know this? Well, unfortunately, there's no reliable marker for monitoring overtraining. And you might say, well, what about heart rate? Now I'm saying, yes, go ahead and monitor your heart rate, but know that your heart rate can change as a result of sympathetic overtraining, which it'll increase, and as a result of parasympathetic overtraining, which it'll decrease. So heart rate alone is not the best marker. Your best tip for avoiding overtraining are implementing 3 different strategies. Number 1, engage in regular physical and psychological testing. And I'll show you how to do that in an upcoming session. So if you do this, you should be able to monitor your performance. And this is going to be one of the things that will be influenced by overtraining. You'll start to see performance dipping, but you have to measure it in the first place. So I'll show you how to do that in a future session. You should also keep a training log, and I'm going to give you a training log, and actually you can download it now and I'll show it to you in a second. That monitors health, physical performance, and nutrition. And also you should make sure that you're periodizing your training plan in a safe way. And of course, that's the whole point of this training course, is I'm going to show you how to periodize your program. So if you do all that correctly, then you will lower your risk of overtraining and you will optimize your adaptation to training. And that's what is shown here. This is your optimal adaptation to training over the long run. What we see here is, again, performance on the vertical axis. We engage in an exercise session. We see a reduction in performance. We allow ourselves enough time to recover, supercompensate, another exercise session. We see this general adaptation syndrome whereby we fatigue and then we give ourselves enough time to recover, and we see another bout of supercompensation. We keep on doing this over time and our performance slowly increases over time. This is your optimal adaptation to training. So before I get to the summary, I just want to show you 2 different things here. And you can download these in the downloads area. What this is a training log. It's just, you can use this to write down exactly what you're doing. This is going to come into play later on, and actually the last session will show you how to use this. But you can start using it now if you like. You have to write down what you're doing. That's very important, keeping a training log. And in this section, I've listed the different components that you should be monitoring to avoid overtraining. You have nutrition factors, physical factors, and then health factors in general. It's things like sleep quality, mood, resting heart rate, body mass, room for general comments, overall sense of fatigue, sense of muscle soreness, appetite. And also I've given you guys the signs and symptoms of sympathetic and parasympathetic overtraining here, so you can be mindful of it all. And then the other thing that we mentioned that's important for reducing your risk of overtraining, it's following a periodized training plan. And just a reminder, this is what we're going to be creating with you. So if you stick with us, we will get here and you will lower your risk of overtraining. So now let's give you the summary. Exercise is a stress that weakens you. Too much rest after exercise, it leads to undertraining and a suboptimal adaptation to training. Not enough rest plus hard training leads to under-recovery and a suboptimal adaptation to training. You need to avoid overtraining by monitoring the signs and symptoms with the training log, as I just showed you, implementing regular physiological and psychological testing, which you're going to get in an upcoming session, and periodizing your training, which is really the second half of this course. So I hope you got a lot out of this session. I hope you appreciate the importance of overtraining, and now more importantly, I hope that you know how to avoid it. And stick with us and we'll make sure that you do whilst optimizing your adaptation training. We'll see you in the next session. Take care.